Today you're going to learn lesson 6.3, the percent proportion. Okay, now this is what that proportion is going to look like right here. Okay, A over W equals P over 100. Now that probably makes no sense to you. But if we look at this proportion right down here, it kind of labels it out. Okay, so it's the part over the whole is equal to the percent. Okay. Now you can think of this, since the labels on the top have to be matching and the labels on the bottom have to be matching, like what we learned when we did proportions, you can always think part over whole equals part over whole. When that second fraction is always going to be that percent, and the whole is always going to be 100, because percent is always out of 100. Okay, so if you had a problem where it asked what percent is 3 out of 4, okay, we would set up that proportion as 3 out of 4 is equal to x over 100, because that's going to give us our percent. All right, so that's going to be kind of like our example number 1. Now we're going to follow the same steps because there are 3 different types of problems, and determining which problem it is the hardest step. So our first step is always going to identify what is missing from that proportion for where we're going to put that variable. Okay, so what percent of 15 is 12? Okay, so what is missing? The percent is missing. We don't know what percent it is, which is x over 100. Okay, so now we already have our second fraction set up. To set up our first fraction, and this is where it gets tricky, what percent of 15? So of 15 is telling us that 15 is our whole. What percent of 15 is 12? Okay, so this percent is going to line up with that 12. Now to solve this proportion, we're just using those cross products. So we end up with 15 times x equals 12 times 100. To get x by itself, we would divide by 15 on both sides. We would get x is equal to 80. And we go back up to look at what it was asking for, percent, so 80% is our final answer. Okay, now this last step is to check your answer. Okay, so it says what percent of 15 is 12? So 80% of 15, and we could take in a calculator, 0.8 times 15, and you should get 12. If not, we made a mistake somewhere here in our proportion. Okay, that is what we do when we are missing percent. Next kind of example is when we're missing the part. Okay, so what number is 36%? So we can already set up that 36 over 100 because we're given that percent. What number is 36% of 50? Okay, so we're missing that part. We're missing that top because what number is equal to 36% when 50 is our whole? So again, we are going to do those cross products. We'll take 100 times x is equal to 50 times 36. Divide by 100 to get that x by itself. We get x is equal to 18. Now it was looking for a part, which is a number, so we just leave it as 18. We do not put a percent symbol on there. Okay, now when we check, we know that 18 over 50 should be equal to 36%. Okay, so we could take 18 divided by 50. That's going to be equal to 0.36, which is equal to 36%, so we know that we solved this proportion correctly. Last type of percent problem. Okay, we're given 150%, so 150%, and this is where it gets tricky because you can have more than 100%. Okay, but percent is still out of 100. So it's 150% over 100 of what number is 24. So the 150% is 24. So we should match up that 150 with 24. Okay, and we don't know that number, so we are missing our whole in this problem. We're missing that whole number down here. Okay, so we are going to use our cross products. We will take 24 times 100, which is equal to 150 times x. We will divide by 150 to get x by itself. We get x is equal to 16. We were missing a whole, which is a number, so we do not need a percent label. Okay, now when we check our answer, does this make sense? Should our whole be less than our part? In this example, yes, because our percent is out of 100 and we have 150%, so we have more than 100%. Okay, so 100% of 16 is 16, and then 50 more percent of that would get us to 24. So this is done correctly. Okay, now the trickiest part of these problems is going to be deciding what is missing when you're not told in the examples like we have been told. All right, so these next ones are going to be questions where we're not told what we're missing, okay, besides in the question, and we have to be able to set up that proportion. Okay, and that's going to be the hardest part of this lesson. If you feel comfortable, I want you to pause the video and I want you to try these on your own. Okay, it doesn't hurt to try and get them wrong. And then come back and check those answers. At least try for number 1. If you don't get it right, then watch the video for number 2, and then try maybe number 3 on your own. Okay, you're catching on. So we always set up with a proportion, so line equals line. What percent, so that already tells us we're missing the percent, so that's our x. Percent is always out of 100. What percent of 5, what percent is 3? So 3 is our percent, 5 is our whole. Okay. Cross products, we would have 3 times 100 equals 5 times x. Divide by 5, divide by 5. We get x is equal to 60. We were missing percent, so 60%. Okay, and that makes sense because 3 is a little over half of 5. 60% is a little over half of 100. Okay, so that does make sense. Number 2, 25 is what percent? So again, we can determine right away that we're missing that percent. 25 is what percent of 20? Okay, so we're missing that percent. Percent is out of 100. 25 is that percent. So 25 should match up with where that percent is of 20, which is our whole. Okay. Again, we're going to use cross products. And if we look at our proportion right now, we notice that our part is going to be bigger than our whole. Okay, so our percent should be bigger than 100. Okay, that's a good little mental note to have. So we do our cross products, 25 times 100 equals 20 times x. Get x by itself by dividing by 20. We get x is equal to 125% because we were asking for a percent. And that does make sense because over here our numerator is bigger than our denominator. So over here our numerator should be bigger than our denominator. So 125% does sound correct. All right, our next problem. Start off with that proportion. What number is 80%? So this right here tells us what number is 80%. So our variable, or what we don't know, that number that we don't know, should match up with the 80%. So since 80% is on the top, that part of that number should be on the top. So what number is 80% of 60? We're missing that part. Okay, so we're going to do cross products. X times 100 equals 80 times 60. Divide by 100. We get x is equal to 48. We were missing a part, so we do not need a percent label. Does that make sense? Is 48 about 80% of 60? Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Let's move on to number 4. 10% of 40.5 is what number? Okay, so 10% of 40.5, so we know that 10% we can set up first, 10 over 100. Okay, 10% of 40.5, so that's going to be our whole. the 10% is, what number? So that 10% should match up with our x. We are missing that part again. Cross products, we have 100 times x equals 10 times 40.5. Right, divide by 100 to get x by itself. We get x is equal to 4.05. We're missing a part, so we don't need a percent label. And does that make sense? 10%. Okay, well, to find 10% of any number, you just move the decimal place over one to the left. So we didn't need to use a proportion for that. For your quiz, you will have to use a proportion in order to solve these. So it's good that we did that anyways. But yes, 4.05 is correct. Number 5. 0.1% of what number is 4? Okay, so let's start with 0.1 over 100 because it's 0.1%. 0.1% of some number is 4. So 0.1% is 4. So that 0.1 and that 4 should match up. We don't know the number. Again, we're going to use those cross products. Well, 4 times 100 is 400. I can do that mental math. And 0.1 times x. We would divide by 1/10. We get x is equal to 4,000. Which is correct. Okay, so 4 over 4,000 is a very, very small number, which makes sense that it would be 0.1%. Okay. Last example, number 6. I want you to try it on your own. So if you have not yet paused this video, I want you to try to pause it and check your answer. Like I said, it's okay to be incorrect. We have 1/2 is 25%. Okay, so you know I always like to start off with my percent. So I have my 25 over 100. 1/2 is 25%, so those two should be matching up. So 1/2 needs to go on top. Of what number? We're not sure. Again, cross products. Well, 1/2 of 100 is 50. 25 times x. Divide by 25. Again, that's one that I can do mental math. X is going to be equal to 2. Okay. That makes sense because 1/2 is 25% or 1/4 of 2 because 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2 gets us to 2. Okay, if you have any questions about this, please, please, please pause the video right now and raise your hand and ask so that we can take care of that before we move on. Okay, our last example is going to be a real life application. So how can we use this in real life? So we have a bar graph here of 2011 Alabama tornadoes that shows the strength of the tornadoes that occurred in Alabama. What percent of the tornadoes were EF1s? Now, when I first read this problem, I had no idea what an EF1 meant. Okay, so I went to Google and I Googled it. And Enhanced Fujita is the scale that they use to measure tornadoes in the US and Canada based on the damage that they cause. Okay, so EF0 is going to be the least amount of damage. EF5 is going to be the most amount of damage. Okay, so we want to know what percent of the tornadoes were EF1. So what are we missing? The percent. We don't know what percent, but we want to know. Okay, so we're going to set up that proportion. We're missing that percent, so we already know where our variable needs to go. Okay, now we want to know what percent were EF1s. So we have to put a number up on the top that's going to correspond to this percent for EF1. So we go to our bar graph. There were 58 EF1s. Now remember, when we're doing the percent proportion, it's part over whole, part over whole. Okay, so on this bottom, we need the total number of tornadoes. So what we would do is we would add up 36 plus 58 plus 29 plus 13 plus 7 plus 2 to find the total number of tornadoes. And when we add those up, we get 145 tornadoes. So that's going to be our denominator in that first fraction. Last thing, we just need those cross products. So we do 58 times 100 equals 145 times x. Get that x by itself, divided by 145. We will get x is equal to 40. The question was asking for percent, so we need to put in that percent label. Okay, and that makes sense because 58 is a little less than a half of 145. 40% is a little less than half, which would be 50%. Okay, so when we check, it does make sense. As always, please make sure that you're asking questions if you have any. Raise your hand, ask for help, or pause, rewind, and rewatch any parts of the video that might help clarify.